right, friends, let's look at what must be in a contract. We're just going to go over the bare basics of what is required for a contract to be valid. So first off, of course, a contract is an agreement between two or more parties, and it is a legal obligation. So if you sign a contract, you have to abide by the contract. That's just the way it works. 6 requirements include, the first requirement is offer and acceptance. You have to offer it to someone, and then that person has to accept it. So just saying it to Bob in a room and then Amy saying, I'll do it, is not going to work. You offer it specifically to someone. If you're offering it, you are the offeror. You're the person making the offer. And the person that you offered it to is the offeree. That's the person who has the opportunity to accept your offer. And then they can accept it, but they can only accept it if the terms are definite. And they have to accept it without any change. So if you say $100, they have to accept it for $100 for that to be the offer and the acceptance of this contract. Otherwise, we'll get into it later in the chapter, that becomes a counteroffer if they change the terms. So it has to be definite, accepted without change by the person who you offered it to. So in this example, Bob and Amy are talking in the cafeteria. Amy says her car is a piece of junk. Bob tells Amy that he has a car he's selling. He tells her he'd sell it to her for $4,000 cash. Amy says, yes, I'll buy it tomorrow. So who would the offeree be? If you were here, we'd do a pair deck, but you're not. So Bob is making the offer to Amy, and Amy is accepting the offer, so Amy would be the offeree. The second requirement for a contract is genuine assent. That basically means they have to genuinely accept your offer because they want to. There's no deception there. So they're accepting it based on what you say, believing that what you say is true. So it can't be based on anybody deceiving somebody or an important mistake or unfair pressure. So if somebody's holding a gun to your head or somebody is threatening to step on your cat's tail or something like that, that's not genuine assent. So they have to enter into that agreement willingly. The third thing is it has to be legal. So if a contract is not legal, then it is not going to be upheld by the law. So you guys have asked in class before, okay, well, like what if somebody gives somebody money to buy drugs and they don't give them the drugs? Can you take them to court? No, because it's an illegal contract. What you agree to has to be legal. Or if somebody says they're going to pay somebody to knock someone off, right? That's not legal. Or pay to beat somebody up. That's not legal. So those contracts would not be enforced under the law. The fourth is called consideration. This one gives people a lot of trouble. Consideration means that each of you have to have some sort of, like you have to get something of value in return. So, for instance, gifts. If your mama just gives you $50 because you're nice, that's not a contract, that's a gift. Consideration requires both sides to get something. So, they have to give you something of value and you give them something in return. It could be a service, it could be a good, it could be a promise to do or not to do something. But there has to be something that is of value given. Capacity means people have to have the legal ability to contract for themselves. We've talked about capacity in the past. Like if someone is insane, they don't have capacity, or if they have dementia, or if you're, under the age of 7 and you're too little. And actually, minors don't have the capacity to contract anyway, just because of their age. And then the 6th requirement is proper form. And there are some contracts that are required to be in writing. Now, we're going to assume, if I don't say it's required to be in writing, that it's not. So if I was having you go through the 6 requirements with a case study, you're not going to say, well, that should be in writing, so it's not valid, unless you know that type of contract has to be in writing. And we're not to the chapter yet where we really break that down, but there are some, like purchases over a certain amount have to be in writing, or real estate contracts have to be in writing. But most contracts do not have to be in writing to be enforceable in court. Of course, it's a whole lot easier, and we know from watching our TV court judges, if it's in writing, there's just not much you can argue about, because that proper form is going to save you in the end, and then it can be enforceable in court. But oral contracts are still valid unless they are for something that requires it to be in writing. Okay, so we have 2 classes of contracts, which has nothing to do with those 6 things. This is just how is a contract right now. It's either completed or it's executory. And that means that it's in the process. So if I go to the store and I ring up my order and I pay and then I walk out with my product I purchased, that's an executed sales contract. But while I'm in the store shopping and I have stuff in my cart, that's an executory sales contract because I haven't paid yet for that. So that contract is not complete. There are some contracts that are often executory. So like if you take out a loan to buy something, the process of time it takes you to pay that back, that's executory. If you have a 12-month apartment lease, well, you're going to pay every month. So until you've paid all 12 months, you're under a lease, and that lease is an executory contract. Until the 12 months are up, you've not fully executed that contract. So that's those classes of contracts. And then finally, we can also put them into categories of express, implied in fact, or implied in law. An express contract is just a contract where everything is said, whether it's in writing or whether it's out loud, but it just means it's all specified. Like, we know exactly what everybody plans to do. So if I say I'm going to buy your 1994 Chevy pickup for $750 and we date it March 15th, then that's all going to be in writing, and that's an express contract. Any contract that's in writing is an express contract. And implied in fact are contracts that are inferred based on your conduct. So it's just what you do. For instance, if you go sit down at a restaurant to eat, you don't say, I'm going to pay you $12.94 for this, plus a 10% tip. You don't have that conversation, but the fact that you're sitting down at the restaurant ordering off of the menu assumes that you're going to pay for the food before you walk out the door. So that's an implied in fact contract because we're not actually going through and stating terms of the contract, but your conduct is going to make that happen. And then implied in law, don't really worry about that one yet, but it's basically like it would be enforced for justice, and we'll get into that later on. Just understand the difference of express and implied. Express, all the terms are stated. It can be oral, it can be writing, it doesn't matter. Implied, it's inferred based on conduct of some sort. Something happens and you don't have it in writing and you didn't have a conversation about it. That's an implied contract. So here's an example of an implied in law, which are quasi contracts. Like a diabetic going into shock and someone gives them a dose of insulin. Maybe they expect to be repaid for the insulin, and that's probably not going to happen, but that would be an example of one where the person was incapacitated, like they were maybe getting ready to go into shock. They couldn't agree to pay them back for it, but maybe they would have to pay them back. Or a doctor did an emergency surgery on you because you were shot and you were unconscious. Well, they're going to do surgery and you're still going to have to pay for the surgery. That's an implied in law or a quasi contract because it's fair. They can't do a surgery and save your life and you say, sorry, I didn't agree to it. There was no signing of the dotted line, because they have to do that and you have to pay for it. So you go into a restaurant, order, and eat your meal. You have not finished eating, you haven't got the bill, and you haven't paid yet. Is it executed or is it executory? And you hopefully know that would be executory because you have not paid and completed the contract. Express or implied in fact? Well, this would be implied because we sat down to eat, but we didn't have a conversation or put it in writing that we were going to pay when we were done. It's just assumed based on our conduct. So that's an example of that. All right, so what you're going to be doing is answering a discussion question where I am going to give you this type of a thing, and you're going to tell me whether it's executed or executory, and whether it's express or implied, and why. So be prepared to answer that question. And this is a really long chapter, so do your best to work through as much as you can, and if you have questions, I'll be glad to create shorter versions of videos over some of those specific areas as you request them.